last time I was in Sudan was actually when I was studying abroad in college. So I was in the UK, and in the UK they had like, I don't know what it was, but it was in like the middle of the semester. You had like this like reading week, which is weird because for us reading week was like right before exams. But essentially you had this like reading week where, it was your chance to kind of catch up and stuff. So I used it as a chance to travel, and I got the chance to like travel to Sudan for like 3 days. And it was like a really interesting time in Sudan as well that I got to see Sudan because it was like right after like the revolution, and this was like the time where there was like transitional government. So for
The 2019?
yeah,
Okay.
exactly. So the government was toppled. We're having like a transitional government right now. So it's a general period of optimism for a lot of Sudanese people. And I just remember that I was at my grandmother's house, and I was walking like to the nearest grocery store, and I saw this little kid who was like maybe 7, 8 years old, and he was outside just like screaming tas good best," which means like let it only collapse, which just means it was kind of like a chant that people said to
Right.
like overthrow the government. So if you've like lived in Sudan or even like in general in the Middle East, there's not much political freedom. And so just to like see a kid just go outside, say that, and he was like laughing and jumping around and stuff, and it just like it was a good time. Like it was a time of like optimism and hope. So yeah, unfortunately, I only stayed there for 3 days, and then I had to go back to classes and stuff. But it was the last time I was there. I tried to go actually after I graduated. I tried to go again, but this was like during COVID when they opened up like travel. Um, but we stopped in Dubai actually for a couple of days, and my little brother, because I was traveling with my family, and my little brother got COVID,
Oh, no.
and we couldn't travel because like he got COVID, and he just like refused to test negative for some reason. And so we kept on testing and testing even after like his symptoms had like gone away, and eventually like I had to come back for my job, so I wasn't able to go to Sudan, but my family did.
But I guess if they would want to go now, it's probably not the best idea,
Yeah,
or
yeah. So nowadays, like Sudan, so I don't know if you know a lot about what's going on right now in Sudan, but essentially, like a civil war has broken out in Sudan. And so, like, the situation's been pretty unsafe. I would actually say Khartoum doesn't have an airport anymore because the airport was like destroyed. So if you want to go into Sudan, you have to go, have to fly into like maybe Port Sudan, but to fly into Port Sudan, you have to fly into like a neighboring country. So it's like really hard to get into Sudan at the moment.
do you think that growing up, your exposure to maybe conflicts throughout Sudan, because my exposure is very limited, but from my understanding that
Yeah.
in 2011, that's when South Sudan seceded from
Yep. Yep.
Sudan, right? And there was also the conflict in Darfur with the
Yeah.
Janjaweed. So obviously, you overhear maybe at the time when you're younger, more uneducated about your country's politics, or over conversation from your parents over shy with
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
other person of the same heritage. Did you, I guess, what did you think then, and then what do you think now based on everything that's kind of unfolded?
Yeah. No, that's a good question. Um, so I'll say with Sudan's an interesting country because it's just there's a lot of different like ethnic groups within the country. So with the secession of Sudan, so I think it was something that was essentially like a long time coming. And if you boil like a lot of the region's issues, and especially Sudan, it'll all trace back to the British Empire, right?
It's always the
It's
British.
always the British, yeah. Like literally what's happening in Palestine right now, like everything always traces back to the British Empire. So the issue with South Sudan, like the North Sudan and South Sudan, was just that um, essentially the two people were pretty different. Like the North Sudan was basically majority Arab, majority Muslim, and then you have South Sudan, which is like majority African, and then majority Christian, right? And so when the British came and then they left, they gave the power to like the North Sudan, and so then the South Sudanese felt like they were being oppressed, and so they wanted to secede. And then obviously no dictator wants to lose land, right? And
Of
so
course.
there's like a lot of atrocities that happen afterwards, and that only just like increased the flame for people to want to secede, and eventually it happened. But Yeah, there's a lot of history, and especially even in like what's happening with Darfur, it all comes down to some of the like similar dynamics in Sudan. But what's interesting was that like as a kid, that was always like outside of my realm. Like my family, my friends, my family's friends, we were always in the north, and the north was always like safe. So a lot of these like external conflicts were never related to us. Like honestly, I was mind blown because I remember as a kid, like just watching TV. I used to watch like Four Kids TV. I don't know if you
Oh
watched
yeah,
it.
four kids.
Yeah.
OG.
They used to sometimes show like ads about, oh, let's help the kids in Darfur and stuff. I never connected that Darfur was in Sudan until like years later. I was like, oh, what's Darfur? Like, I thought it was like some other country, but then it just blew my mind that Darfur is in Sudan because of like how like I guess insular people are in Sudan, depending on which region you're from. But what's been happening now is actually affected me a lot because it affects my family, like my family's friends, like people we're related to. It's been very, yeah, it's affected us directly, and it actually affects everybody in Sudan now as well. So that's kind of been the change of perspective.
Because the main battleground for the civil war is in Khartoum.
Which is where most of my family lives. Exactly.
Wow. So from that period, because Omar al-Bashir, he was the dictator essentially. He was
Yeah.
a dictator, right? Or was he?
He was no, he was a dictator. He was
Okay.
I think he was the longest ruling dictator.
I think it was 30 years, right?
30 years, yeah. Yeah. He was going for a record.
Well, so this is again is my limited knowledge, but for Omar al-Bashir to prevent a coup to happen to him because they did a coup to the last guy and the last
Exactly.
guy and the last guy.
Yeah.
He basically created his own military defense, a paramilitary group essentially, and they're the ones who prevent him from prevent anyone else from attempting a coup on him. So obviously, with some dictators, I don't even want to say some, maybe all, the people have a negative perception or a perception of we need to take this dictator down. There is, you know, I don't know too many Libyans,
Yeah.
but I'm drawing a direct connection because a lot of people that, mostly Arab, but they're not Libyan, they're Palestinian or Egyptian, but they'll say that, oh, because of the fact that Gaddafi, after he got killed,
Yeah.
Libya became worse off. But what we've been programmed, maybe not even programmed, maybe it's the truth that Gaddafi was a dictator.
Yeah.
But there's a clear war situation happening within Libya as well. Do you think that, and I don't want to say like, oh, it was better off that al-Bashir was still in his position
Yeah.
of leadership, but if he truly was the dictator that, the parallels that you can make to Libya, is the current leadership right now trying to take over as the next dictator, essentially, instead of being a democratically elected president or
Yeah. And that's the issue. So it's twofold. Currently, there isn't any clear leadership, right? But the people who overthrew him are people from the army, right? And their goal was to kind of follow his footsteps. So you're right. Like they just wanted to play the same playbook and then be the same person. And it's interesting because like whenever this overthrowing happens, at the very beginning of it, it's somewhat popular because every dictator is unpopular, right? So then, they get deposed and you get someone new, and then there's like some optimism. They come in, they give you a great speech about like how there was just so much corruption before and we're here to fix the corruption. So if you look at some of the old footage of like when al-Bashir became president, people were cheering. But obviously they realized that it was just more of the same. And so so essentially with like new leadership, it's going to be the same thing. And especially if any leadership can bring in stability in Sudan, that's kind of what people are wishing for right now. Like I would say a lot of people are saying, and the sentiment on the street is that if we knew deposing al-Bashir was going to bring all this chaos, we would have not like went outside. We wouldn't have protested. We would have stayed home.
Right.
So any kind of stability is going to be very welcomed. But yeah, there's not like a lot of optimism afterwards.
And of course, you can't put that blame on the civilians. I mean, they just want to,
live their lives.
live
Yeah.
their lives, and if there's injustice because of the rule of a dictator,
Yeah.
obviously they want to push that person out of a
Exactly.
position of power. It just is crazy to see the dynamic switch from the marches in 2019 and removing al-Bashir
Yeah.
from office, and then now seeing the civil war essentially
Yeah.
unfolding and so many people getting
Like displaced or
displaced,
Yeah.
killed. It's very unfortunate circumstances.